Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching and listening to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News, and I am Muhammad Hussain Qazi, and these are the previous week's headlines from the course of recorded history. On the 27th of January 1945, the Nazi concentration camp of Auschwitz was liberated. Auschwitz was one of the worst concentration camps that the Nazis had created. Behind its closed doors, many atrocities were carried out by the Third Reich against the Jewish population of Europe, alongside, of course, communists and prisoners of war and other ethnicities and religions that the Nazis were targeting. So, the liberation of Auschwitz by the Red Army revealed to the world the exact scale and magnitude of Nazi tyranny and atrocities. The date 27th of January 1945 is commemorated each year as the Auschwitz Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so the 27th of January 1945 would be a significant date in the course of human history. Moving forward, on the 28th of January 1915, the American Coast Guard Service was established, a significant patrolling service that protects the naval borders of the United States. It was created after the merger of the Revenue Cutter Service and the Life Saving Service, and it has since become a key maritime security and rescue institution. And thus, its creation reflected a growth in federal responsibility for the safety of American borders. And moving forward, on the 29th of January, on the subject of American safety and borders, the Lend-Lease Bill was introduced in 1941 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This would be the bill that would allow the US supply chain to begin to other allied powers, other fellow allied powers, as would happen, and it would thus be one of the more significant moves made by the United States before formally entering World War II. This thus signaled the erosion of American isolationism from the affairs of Europe and the world generally. And so, this erosion of American isolationism has since impacted the world order even till this date. And moving forward, on the 30th of January 1933, another significant event would occur, which would be, of course, significant mainly because of its impact on the political history of Europe, but also as this would be one of the key events before the beginning of the Second World War. And yes, that is the election and appointment of Adolf Hitler as the Chancellor of Germany, which would happen on this day, the 30th of January 1933. And it would be so when President Paul von Hindenburg, former German general and president of the Weimar Republic, appointed Hitler legally. This marked the beginning of the consolidation of power by the Third Reich into what would become the Nazi state. And so this day would not only be remembered for the election of one of the most evil leaders, as has been said by historians and has been proven so by historians, not only one of the most evil leaders in the history of the world, but it would also demonstrate how democratic systems could be dismantled from within. And so this day would set a crucial and a very negative perspective towards the weaknesses of the democratic system. And moving forward, on the 31st of January 1968, the Tet Offensive began. This would be one of the most brutal offensives in the history of the Vietnam War, and it showed the coordinated North Vietnamese and Viet Cong attacks that were taking place across South Vietnam. And it was a militarily costly project for the communist forces, but psychologically devastating for the American armed forces that were, or members of the American armed forces that were deployed in South Vietnam at the time. And it was a turning point in the public perception of the Vietnam War as well. This would be one of the many events that would change the mood of the American public back home in regards to the Vietnam War. And On the 1st of February in 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran to take charge of the recently formed Islamic Republic of Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini's return to Iran signaled the end of the era of the Pahlavis and, of course, the beginning of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is still in effect to this day. Ayatollah Khomeini would thus become the supreme leader of Iran. And on the 2nd of February 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad came to an end when the German Sixth Army surrendered to Soviet forces, thus marking an end to one of the bloodiest battles of World War II and the beginning of the changing of the tide in the favor of the Allied powers. It would be after the Battle of Stalingrad that the Allied forces, in particular the Soviet forces, would be pushing or making their way to Berlin. And of course, soon after this, after the opening of the second front, the Allies would do the Normandy landings in France, and soon after the war would come to an end in 1945. Thus, the end of the Battle of Stalingrad is a significant date in the history of the Second World War, one of the bloodiest conflicts remembered to this day. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude this week's Headlines of the Day. You are watching and listening to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News. I also noticed I accidentally said Headlines of the Day when it is clearly Headlines of the Week. I suppose some old habits die hard. But regardless, ladies and gentlemen, I shall see you next Sunday with more intriguing headlines from the week that shall pass. Until then, stay tuned to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News, and I am Muhammad Hussain Qazi. Good night.